As much as lawyers get a bad rep, there are a few good ones around, at least in fiction. And one of them is Hiromi Higuruma, a defense lawyer who purposely took on the most daunting cases, hoping to save the few souls that he could. But how does an attorney fit into the world of sorcery and curses? Well, let's get into it, because before the Culling games, Higuruma wasn't simply just a smart man, he was a genius. He was accepted into law school and passed the bar on his first try. Anyone who knew of him recognized his outstanding intelligence. He was even capable enough to be a judge rather than a lawyer, but felt his skills were better suited as an attorney, especially since he felt like he belonged among the masses of ugly people rather than above them. Unfortunately, for those not practicing law with a sense of justice in mind, Higuruma awakened as a sorcerer. The timing of it couldn't have been worse, considering that he had just become a public defender, and wanted to protect an innocent man from unfair murder charges. He thrived with a difficult situation, and found proof that his client couldn't be the murderer. But that wasn't enough for the retrial, and this time his client was sentenced to life in prison, despite still being innocent of any crime. With anger at being betrayed by justice and the facts that he believed in, Higuruma's curse technique triggered, and he killed both the judge and opposing lawyer through Judge Man. Sometime after this, he busied himself with getting rid of cursed spirits, much like Yuji and Choso had. But it also gave him enough time to study cursed energy, techniques, and his domain before he settled into Colony 1. Later on during the Culling game, from the moment that he's introduced, Higuruma is depicted as either a major threat or a necessary ally to the main characters. Just as Yuji and Megumi are finally stepping into his colony, he's already taken out enough people to have over 100 points on hand. With it being a long game, Higuruma establishes himself in Ikeburo, making it easier to rest and collect supplies as the event progresses on. But it's evident by the time Yuji arrives to recruit him that Higuruma is struggling with internal turmoil. And this despite saying that he's in favor of the Culling game and the means of justice it uses to punish others. But who in their right mind hangs out in a bathtub fully clothed, right? So instead of handing over his points, Higuruma summons his gavel and Judge Man, preparing to take on Yuji next. As someone intrinsically connected to the courtroom, it's no surprise that Higuruma's curse technique and domain are linked to crime and justice. As a lawyer, he requires a third party to help enact law, implemented through a shikigami called Judge Man. Not unlike Rika, this shikigami only listens to its owner and takes Higuruma's side fully. With no need to create it, Higuruma has a domain with Judge Man called Deadly Sentencing. As expected, it takes the form of a courtroom and forces anyone pulled within to follow the rules of the court. And, interestingly, neither side can attack the other until a verdict is called. The only way to escape without injury is to convince Judge Man of innocence, or have undeniable defense. This isn't easy, since Judge Man also provides Higuruma with evidence to build his case. But just like in court, Higuruma has no idea what the sentencing will be until it's called. It could be a number of things, including confiscation of a curse technique and the death penalty. The former means a retrial is still possible if not enough evidence is provided. Higuruma is in charge of dealing out the harshest verdict and gains the executioner's sword from his gavel. Anyone hit with this weapon dies instantly. This is easily one of the strongest abilities in all of Jujutsu Kaisen. However, if Higuruma decides against enacting death on someone, then he's able to dispel the entire thing. Besides that, Higuruma's of genius level intelligence, and easily figures out how to create barrier techniques through analyzing his innate domain. Not only that, but he figured out how to reinforce himself with cursed energy, as well as domain amplification to guard against others' domains, and how to use reverse curse technique to heal. Something that is known to be complicated. I mean, Gojo himself only unlocked it when he was on the verge of death. All this to say that Yuji has his work cut out for him if he thinks Higuruma's a pushover, and will just passively hand him his points. Not only does Higuruma immediately open Deadly Sentencing to start a trial, but there's no way to inflict injury on each other while in the domain. Not until a verdict is given at least. So much like a real case, Yuji's forced to calmly defend himself against Higuruma's talented attorney questioning, while also having no knowledge of his crimes beforehand. In other words, Higuruma is being both judge and lawyer at the same time, learning information while trying to prove Yuji's guilt. It starts small enough. Yuji going into a pachinko parlor as an underage boy. With no idea of the context or the details, Judge Man hands over some evidence against Yuji for Higuruma to use in his case. But seeing as Higuruma tricked Yuji in a way, the young sorcerer lies about his crime and has his curse technique removed. Except, as we know, he doesn't already have one. This means Yuji has his cursed energy entirely confiscated as punishment instead. All he had to do was deny going into the parlor, and he probably would have been off the hook. Yuji gets attacked, and even Higuruma's shocked by the outcome, having not been aware of the penalty being so strict for someone without a curse technique. When Yuji asks for a retrial, Higuruma has no choice but to accept, and they begin round 2. But this time the crime he's accusing Yuji of is much more severe. Judge Man chooses the massacre in Shibuya as the case to defend. And we all know Yuji feels only guilt and remorse for everything that happened during that time. And as he admits his guilt, accepting his fate, already being in a bad mental state beforehand, the death penalty is called by Judge Man immediately. The executioner's sword shifts from the gavel, ready to enact justice on Yuji. Before he can take him out, Yuji fights back one last time, kicking Higuruma away. In that moment, he reveals the information that Sukuna was in control of his body, and that he was not the one at fault for the violence that occurred. Still, Yuji believes he's guilty, and Higuruma is reminded of why he wanted to be a lawyer, why he wanted to protect those facing difficult situations and crimes. But that's enough to convince him that Yuji is no better or worse than him, especially since they've both killed of their own choice. With that in mind, he adds a rule to the culling game like Yuji wanted, and makes sure to transfer a point so that they both won't be at risk for curse technique removal, which will result in death for over 2 weeks. Afterwards, Higuruma is undecided about what he's going to do next, besides turning himself in for his crimes when the culling game is over, not willing to outright accept joining the Jujutsu side yet. Later on in the Shinjuku showdown, as you can imagine for someone conflicted and feeling guilty about what he's done in the name of good, Higuruma eventually makes his way back to the right side. It's either that or risk the whole world going to heck because he feels guilty about killing people. That's how he ends up in a group meeting with all of the Jujutsu heavy hitters, helping to plan their attack on Sukuna if Gojo and Kashimo's attacks somehow fail. But at the same time, he's thinking of a way to ensure Sukuna is taken down with him if need be. And also ideally. He's got a lot of guilt he's carrying, the same way Yuji does, so he'd be fine as a martyr for humanity's safety. The only issue is, even bringing Sukuna into a court case doesn't guarantee that the crime would result in the death penalty for the King of Curses. But Yuji suggests that redoing his second trial with regards to the Shibuya incident would ensure Higuruma could use the Executioner's sword on Sukuna. It's basically the only can't-miss attack from Higuruma's domain. Like the rest of them, Higuruma sees Gojo off, and he watches the fight from inside Rika. Unfortunately, Gojo and Kashimo aren't enough to snuff out Sukuna, so Plan C is put into effect. Higuruma gladly jumps in alongside Yuji, prepared for the retrial that will allow him to use his weapon on Sukuna. One good thing about Higuruma's involvement is how new he is, so any skills beyond his curse technique and domain are a mystery. He expects it when Yuji jumps in, and can defend against him, but he knows the rules of Judge Man, and even welcomes the effect of being struck by the Executioner's sword. With that in mind, Higuruma guesses that fighting Gojo made Sukuna lose the 10 shadows, so the current confiscation should be for his shrine ability, right? Higuruma instantly realizes the wrong thing is taken, but doesn't have the time to share that information before Sukuna slashing them. It's the same kind of loophole like Yuji losing his cursed energy, but instead of it being in his favor, Sukuna's cursed weapon is taken, and he's free to use his usual slice and dice at will. If not for Kusakabe and his proficiency in amplification and barrier techniques, Higuruma would have been a goner right then. While the others dive in, he has a moment to regain his calm and plan for his next move. This means, even though he's not as quick on his feet, he can use domain amplification to avoid further injury. Sukuna even predicts that he could be as talented as Gojo if given enough time. And let's not overlook how difficult it is to block someone else's curse technique, pausing your own and then restarting it. Only someone extremely adept at using cursed energy and techniques could do that so smoothly. And because Sukuna, like Kenjaku, is a thrill seeker, He doesn't want Yuji getting in the way of his hunt for Higuruma. Once Yuji's knocked aside, Higuruma's on his own. A limb cut off as a test. And he doesn't disappoint, using reverse curse technique to heal the blood loss and regain his cut off limbs before it can be fatal. He tries to fulfill his role of taking Sukuna with him if he's going to lose, but he stabs a disconnected hand and ends up deeply wounded instead. With no more chances, he passes his weapon to Yuji and hopes for the best. Evidently, the Jujutsu world isn't done with him, and Yui yoinks him from the fight alongside Kirara and gets him some healing. Higuruma wouldn't purposely put his life fully in danger, but he was ready to welcome death with open arms, should it come for him. And against someone like Sukuna, how could it not? After the battle with Sukuna, well, long story short, Higuruma survives with nothing else but a broken arm. He meets up with everyone, with Maki wondering why he didn't use a tape recording to avoid risking his life. We all know his domain blocks any kind of violence until the case is over, so it wouldn't have been possible. Plus, he was toying and testing Higuruma at best, and he didn't feel threatened by him. But he does agree that the battle would have been easier if Yuta had brought back up from the beginning. Later, Higuruma doesn't face any charges like he wanted due to the Jujutsu officials covering it all up. But Shimizu insists that she's going to make him face time for what he did in a retrial, and he welcomes that kind of simple justice. And that is the story of Hiromi Higuruma. If you like this video, guys, please give it a like and please subscribe for more Jujutsu Kaisen content like this.